So for my history, I am an RN. I've been an RN since 2007, so a very long time. And I used to be a labor and delivery and a postpartum nurse. And at that time, I wanted to go into midwifery. I initially intended to go into nurse midwifery, but when I breastfed my oldest son, who just turned 17, it really rocked my world, like in the best way. And I just became very passionate about breastfeeding and breastfeeding support. I got so much pushback in my own like family and community as far as kind of just a lot of the myths and misconceptions and like my whole family tried to do like an intervention to tell me that he wasn't getting enough milk and I need to give him a bottle. My aunt would call me on the phone and tell me that. Just, so that just blew my mind. But I did have, I was educated and I knew better and I had read so much about breastfeeding and it was so important to me. And I was also just so like I'm a stubborn person, so I'm a Taurus. I'm a very like stubborn. So the best way to guarantee I'll do something is to try to talk me out of it or to make to think that I can like doubt me, like doubt that I can do it. And then I'm gonna just do what I like, not out of spite, but I mean, kind of that's how I operate. So that made me more determined to successfully breastfeed my son because I knew it was good for him. I knew it was the right thing and I knew the science behind it. So I did. I nursed him for 2 years. And I wasn't working on labor and delivery at that time. I did decide I wanted to become a lactation consultant, but I couldn't figure out how to get in because unless you work in that environment, it's hard to get clinical hours and it's just almost unheard of. So in the meanwhile, I was thinking about becoming a Leche League leader or it's just anything I was reading about to try to earn hours, but nothing really ever happened. And I was also trying to get into labor and delivery at that time because I'm in nursing. The specialties are kind of, especially if you live in the South, specialties in nursing are very kind of like there's a lot of bias. There's a lot of racism, in healthcare. So it was really hard to get into that specialty as a Black nurse. It's like you have to know someone, or it's just very political to get into any of the specialties. They really just want to stick everyone into the broad, like medical, surgical nursing, and it's really hard to get into a specialty. So it took me years, several years, to get into to labor, like the specialty I wanted to go into in nursing, labor and delivery, and we had an interim manager who was from the Midwest, so she was more open-minded, and I just happened to be at the right place in the right time, and I got my foot in the door there. And then also, it's unheard of in nursing to have educational funding. So at that time, when I did go there to work, there was some funding, and they actually sent me and a couple of the other nurses to a lactation specialist training, which would be the equivalent of a CLC. So this is like a certified lactation specialist, similar to a lactation counselor. And so we went to that week-long class. That was when we used to do trainings in person back in the day, right? And so I went to Chicago and I went to that training and I learned so much. And I came back to the hospital and I was like really pumped up about it, amped up, and started applying that. I still did my job as a nurse and I just started incorporating that into my role. And then eventually I got enough hours to sit for the IBCLC exam and I started doing that and I did it in the hospital, um, for quite a long time. And then eventually, took the exam. There's a whole bunch of stuff I had to go through to get a job as a lactation consultant, but that was kind of my journey into lactation.
Will will a mom directly come to you? And I'm only saying this as an IBCLC because as a full spectrum doula, I'm a full spectrum doula, brain spotting practitioner, right?
That's
We do all the things in a
yes.
sense, but I know as a doula, I took certain trainings that was an equivalent to a CLC,
Hmm.
equivalent to.
Hmm.
And I also have friends that are IBCLCs.
Hmm.
And I remember when I used to get stomped with the mom, like, with all the myths and all the things that come with breastfeeding to keep them encouraged. One of them had told me, well, you don't come to me just yet. I'm like the top tier of breastfeeding. And I was like, okay, let me look for more connections with certified lactation consultants. I guess that's the level that I'm looking for. And it turned out later on that the mom was beginning to get metastasis. And at that point, I really, really got concerned. And I called another friend that was an IBCLC, and she was like, "This is what we do. This is what we do." So, as someone new that's coming into the birth worker space, can you speak a little bit about the two different levels? Because they're both helpful to a
Mhm.
mom or right, a birthing person that
Mhm.
is looking to nourish their child through this natural form. Um, is it a CLC, IBCLC, IBCLC does it all? Like, can you please talk a little bit about that just for clarity?
Okay, so sure. So like as even just as a birth, any type of birth worker, as a doula, you're on the front lines. You're seeing these parents all the time, these mothers and these birthing people, right? And they trust you and they're looking to you to support them and you're on the front lines. You're the first person they're probably going to ask. So that's so important to at least have a foundational knowledge. And I do a lot of trainings specifically for birth workers. And then you have a CLC, which was, I would say, like a certified lactation counselor or a certified lactation specialist. And then you have like a lactation educators. There's all those kind of mid-level roles, and they're all wonderful. Um, there's a place, kind of like you've heard the terminology, we can all eat, right? Like there's a place for everyone in lactation. I think the main difference is so like an educator or a lactation counselor, especially, the scope would be a little bit smaller as far as when things get complex beyond the basics of just like latch and position and pumping, right? And it starts to go out of the ordinary. That's when ideally they would refer to an IBCLC. But I will say, as an IBCLC, I do it all and I love it all. I mean, it doesn't matter. It could be a question. It's education. I love prenatal education. I love, you know, the hospital, just the common questions and the common misconceptions that we see every day of just like, I'm not making enough milk. They think that on day one, that they just don't understand how it works. I love that type of education, but I really love prenatal education because if you can get to them earlier and they know what to expect when they go into to deliver, it goes much more smoothly. So and then the other thing I will say is as an IBCLC, it's a little bit more accessible financially because for the parents, because a lot of times insurance will cover seeing an IBCLC, but most people who are practicing as like a CLC or a CBS or any of those certifications, most of the time you have to pay out of pocket for them because the insurance will not typically cover. Now, there's exceptions to that, like there's TRICARE, the military insurance, they will cover for a CLC, I believe, but most insurances will not, and so they end up paying out of pocket. And then not only paying out of pocket, but because the general community doesn't know the difference between maybe basic support and they really think it's all the same thing, they don't know, then they might pay someone out of pocket, and that person doesn't really have the advanced knowledge to really do advanced support. So then sometimes they end up paying out of pocket and then having to go pay someone else again to get the support they need. But at the same time, I'll also, full disclaimer, tell you that all IBCLCs are not created equal, right? Because just because you went and took the exam does not mean that you have the skills or the knowledge, just because you can pass the test. So those are skills that I've built over the last dozen years, and it's really important to me, and I take it very seriously, especially in private practice, because you see so much, and I just feel like I feel so responsible for the outcome that I just always want to know as much as I can possibly know, and I never stop learning. I'm always taking all the communication, all the like continuing education and things like that that I can get my hands on. I've taken special training and managing like tongue ties and those type of things, low milk supply, herbal remedies, all that type of stuff. That I've really brought in my skill set to just really know the latest, most evidence-based and best practices.
I mean, it's so important, especially when we're serving our communities.
Hmm.
We haven't had access to so many things that when someone comes across a professional like you, that you have a whole full spectrum of tools in your tool bag. How much more comforting is that? It really is comforting. Um, I wanted to ask you, I was like, when I get Leslie on, what will the conversation be like? Because when you're familiar with the topic and the work, it's like, let's keep it, for the new ones, but also let's enrich the conversation for those that are seasoned. I wanted to ask you, um, it to me, and I say to me it's common knowledge, 'cause I was going to say it's common knowledge, but maybe for some people it's not. It's common knowledge. Like I said, maybe for some people not, but for me in my space it is, and I'm sure for you it is too, that breastfeeding a child gives them a better chance of combating child childhood obesity.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you, when you're working with the mom, and they have classified her as obese, right? What are the different ways that you can work with her, and what is it like for her? Because I know studies have shown that mothers with obesity, they have issues with like the initiating and establishing their milk supply. They just have different challenges. If we could speak on that a little bit, and the reason why I bring that up is because in today's world we are managing a lot of those spaces, and those are
Mhm.
difficult conversations to have. So I know that they have that took a little bit, like they have shorter breastfeeding duration
Mhm.
and things of that nature. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. I think a lot. So, like me being, I'm obese myself, and I have twins who are 5. I nursed them till they were 4 years old, and we were successful. And so, I think in medicine itself, like side, there's a lot of like fat bias, right? And so, some of the things that happen with overweight and obese people is they may have body image issues, but also the way that people treat them and the way that they speak about their bodies and they talk to them, that makes a difference in the care. And even just me overhearing some of the ways that the physicians may speak about someone's body, the nurses, and sometimes they're a little bit more standoffish and just like not, and that's not even just size, but also I would say race. They do that to black women, then don't be fat and black, right? So they, they really look at you different. I mean, they really treat people. It's sad, it's one of those things you can't prove because it's one of those biases that's sometimes it's unconscious, right? But the way sometimes I feel like that is more of an impact than anything because just as because someone is obese does not necessarily mean that they have underlying conditions, right? But when someone is not obese and they have those conditions, they say, "Oh, it's just luck," right? Like, "Oh, just for you, you have a thyroid issue, or you have, insulin resistance if you're a gestational diabetic or whatever." But as an obese person, it's like, "Well, that's what you get for being fat," you're a higher risk
Right.
because you're big.
So right.
A lot of it, I think there's people also people that are heavy and that are perfectly healthy that don't have any blood pressure issues or diabetes or any of that stuff. And really those are things that affect the milk supply. And then so sometimes if it was a body image issue, maybe they want to cover up more. Maybe they don't want to nurse in front of people because they don't feel like people are watching them and things like that. But I would say, like the weight itself, you have to look at what other things are we factoring in that go along with that, right? Is it racial bias? Is it size? Are there other things that we're not also considering? Do they have a C-section? Also, high rates of C-sections, right, with obese women, right? So, how many of those things are like um, morbidities, right? And coexisting conditions or situations that would add to making it a little bit more difficult to nurse. Um, and I've had like I think the sometimes it's a mental thing.
Mhm. No, you're correct on that because, as far as obese, me too. And I had the physician remind me as soon as I hit that 5 pounds,
Hmm.
oh, 5 pounds, you're obese. I'm like, I only gained 5 pounds. And that was way back when I was 125 pounds.
Wow.
Now that I'm almost touching 200, I'm like, oh my goodness. You know what I mean? Like, and I did perfectly fine
Mhm.
with breastfeeding my
Mhm.
children.
Mhm.
And I say child because it's with this last one that I gained the weight, but you're so right. It is how they speak to you and also how you internalize as well. And then also when we're talking about the obesity part, it's not always about food.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's the medication, and that also interferes with the breastfeeding.
And metabolic syndrome, so we're starting to find, now with the uprise of the GLP-1s and everything, we're starting to really treat obesity like a chronic condition instead of a failure. Really, honestly, it's treated like a failure, right? But like there's so many underlying things, so, hormonally that happen and metabolically that truly affect weight because how come some people can, eat like, anything they want and stay slim, and then some people they just blow up?
So true. So true. I want to talk a little bit. I hope that this is the fun part, if there is a fun part. But you've been part of the birth worker community space for a while now, and that's what connected us even more.
Yeah.
And you had dropped a post in the space.
Yep.
I want to talk about, that question and what you offer, because the question that you dropped was, would you ever consider becoming an IBCLC if the path was more straightforward? And I love that you said yes or no, no judgment,
Hmm.
to begin the engagement. It reached 3,400 members. You had 76 comments and 92 emojis. And I say emojis because it was like a like, a
Hmm.
heart. So that shows a big interest, right? Supply and demand, especially in our spaces. So speak a little bit more about that. What encouraged you to drop that question? Where were you going with it? And how can you help the community in that space? And what do you offer?
Okay, so the reason I asked the question is because the longer I do this for a living, and the more, especially as I become more active and like more visible online and grow like an online community, I see that there are a lot of people who are very interested in lactation. But there's a lot of myths when it comes to becoming an IBCLC. So a lot of people completely dismiss it because they say that's something they would like to do, but they don't want to go back to school. But they're not a nurse, so they can't do that. But, it takes too long. But I can't find a mentor. Okay, there's so many reasons, right? And what I found also is I feel like birth workers, doulas, perinatal professionals, and lactation, like they go together like peanut butter and jelly. And it's who else makes a greater person to offer that type of support than you on the front lines as a doula, as a birth worker, because again, they're looking to you, they trust you. You already have the skill set, you have that nurturing spirit, um you have their trust, you have their attention. You're the person they want to lean on. So who else who already has that skill set? Because that's something, actually, I would say it's a skill set, but also I'll say it's a calling because, and it's a gift, right? Because it doesn't come natural to everyone. Everyone is not a nurturer. Everyone doesn't know how to talk to people. Everyone does not know how to read the room and how to like hold space for people when they need in the way that they need it. And so you have that skill set already, and that's such an important part of lactation. You know how to counsel people, you know how to talk to people. That is so important in lactation. So I just feel like what better candidates to become IBCLCs and the future IBCLCs than doulas and birth workers. And I also think to myself, okay, do like again, I told you I used to want to be a midwife. But the older I get, and raising my kids, it's like I kind of want that more predictable schedule. I don't necessarily be able to run around in the middle of the night. It's not like cute anymore to be up running out at 2 o'clock in the morning, to a birth. I think I made a good decision because right now it does not sound appealing to me, right? And it is like, but there's a time in life where probably that will not fit into your lifestyle. So, what a way to still be present and to still be so impactful and make such an important mark on in their lives than to be able to support them that way, but also to have a more predictable schedule, not necessarily be on call. But even as a postpartum doula, lactation and postpartum doula, those could just very much go hand in hand together. I've done it. Like I've done postpartum doula and lactation contracts before. And so I just see how beautiful they can work together in harmony. And I just want to encourage more birth workers to go for it because I feel like when people find out when I break it down to them, they find out that sometimes they think I'm lying. Like they it's unbelievable to them because they're like, no, that can't be true because I need
It's
to.
too good to be true.
Mhm. And so it's so they're so excited whenever they find out that a lot of what they've heard is not true and that it is attainable to them way more than they ever thought. Then a lot of them are jumping on it, and it makes me so happy and so proud just to be able to be that bridge and to be a source for them, like a mentor, and be a source of knowledge and a source to kind of like walk them through navigating the process.
That sounds like, I mean, yes, 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 and yes. It's necessary. It goes together like peanut butter and jelly. It really, really does. So what are you offering? Because I did look up, when I did your bio, so I did your bio, I dropped your information in. What are you offering, when you see so many comments that shows the interest, and I do want to encourage this in the space, especially for those that are looking to be an IBCLC. What are you offering from what you do? I know I've seen that you have a couple of things, a podcast, please share those things here.
So I have a couple. I had a secret podcast that was just like a 4 episode private podcast breaking down the process to kind of just get those wheels turning for people and give them that just to inspire them and let them see that it is possible, right? And and then I recently, I say a couple months ago, I started a weekly podcast. So now I have a weekly podcast that I put out every Tuesday and I'm enjoying that. And it's all about becoming an IBCLC as well. And so those are the kind of the entry into my world will be through our podcast and be through the secret podcast and the weekly podcast, either one or both. And then what I find what I've tried to do by doing this for so long is seeing the barriers to getting into lactation and trying to solve that. So most people that want to become a lactation consultant, they're like they would probably lean towards pathway 3 because there's 3 pathways to become an IBCLC, and most people are going to lean to pathway 3 if they're not an RN. But most people don't understand that anybody can do any pathway. It doesn't matter your background. The only thing that being an RN does is it waives your health science requirements because they assume that a nurse or anyone with the science background, a doctor, chiropractor, different types of medical professionals, speech therapists, people like that, midwives, that they took health sciences because we had to for our degree. But other than that, everyone else is on a level playing field. And so just like dispelling the myth that you have to be an RN because you don't, and then dispelling the myth that you have to go back to college and take a whole bunch of classes if you're not an RN, but you don't. And there's this online school called Sophia.org, and you could take your health sciences that you need to take the IBCLC exam in a few months for a few $100s and be done with it. And so you're not going to a college campus and sitting through lectures and going, semester by semester just to do that because what adult learner who has a lot of responsibilities and a family really has the bandwidth to necessarily return to school, right? Especially if it wasn't for a specific degree, just to take some prerequisite courses to do this. And
Nobody want to go back to school.
exactly. And it's a journey, it's a journey. So that right there cuts a lot of time off. And that right there, just knowing they don't have to physically go back to school and that they can just like go online and work through these self-paced classes really on their own time. That that like
Yeah, and it's not to get educated because there's a difference.
Mhm.
Yes, continue the education, continue the learning, but
Mhm.
to go back to school,
Mhm.
no, who has time for that these
No,
days?
no.
Because no longer is a one or two income home.
Mhm.
It's two, three, four side jobs, different streams of income. You really have to be creative, especially in today's economy and in the
Yes.
birth workspace.
Yes. And then the data, like going back to school, because college is very expensive. So, like solving that problem, that's a big one. That's kind of like where the light bulb goes on. Like, okay, well, I don't have to go back to school. But then the other dilemma that most people run into, because again, they lean towards pathway 3, is they cannot find a mentor. And even if they can find a mentor, how do you have the time to turn your life upside down to to rearrange your whole life? Do you have the support system to basically go work side by side full time with the IBCLC to get your clinical hours? Who has that time? So, and then even if they do have the support system to be able to do that, okay, like you have to find an IBCLC in your community who's willing to do that. And then if you do, they have to be busy enough to for you to get those hours in a timely manner. And most private practices, they're solo or very small. Like I might when my practice was its busiest, maybe I was seeing a dozen people a week, and so imagine like every time that I have a consult, you meet me, you get a child, you get a babysitter, and you meet me at someone's house, and we do a consult. This an hour, and you got childcare, you drove, you did all this, and you got 1 hour, and you only need like 499 more, right? So, so imagine that. So that's the other dilemma. And then the ones that they do find someone, a lot of times they do charge, like some of them charge by the hour, and it can be very pricey. So, what I did with my program is called Lactation Consultant Launchpad. And I kind of feel like I try to make it a hybrid between pathway one and pathway three. So, like the best things about each pathway, I try to make it into one. So, pathway one traditionally does not have a mentor. Well, I've been a lactation consultant for a dozen years now. It's been almost a dozen years now. I've been a lactation consultant. So, and I've had worked in the hospital. I work in the community. I teach. So I really am a wealth of knowledge to be able to help and support them, right? And be a resource to them. So they have access to me for that. And then I've facilitated online clinical hours. So they're able to come into the program, provide support in online communities, teach a breastfeeding class that I give them online or in their own community. We have a warm line they can staff and answer the phone calls. We have a drop-in clinic that's virtual that they can pop into. They can sign up for and answer those telehealth calls. And all those ways they're able to earn clinical hours on their own time. And they can also do what they do in their own community. And even as a doula, they can, whatever breastfeeding support that they are doing, they're able to count that as well. Because the reason why they're able to do that is because I have a peer support organization. So I'm approved under our certifying body, IBCLE, to have peer support counselors. So people that come into my program, they become a peer counselor under my program, under my organization, and that way they're able to go to earn hours and legitimately count them inside and outside the program.
So you have truly created that straightforward path that you were asking in your question.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
it's like, hey, get to know me
Mhm.
because I see me in you because I've been there. I've been
Yeah.
you.
Yes, I just want it to be accessible, and then we need more of us in this field. We don't know the exact numbers, but the guess that we think it is we think it's about like 2% of IBCLCs are Black.
Really?
Mhm. And
I
it's a
mean,
small world because
I say really, but am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised. You
and
know,
it's just like whenever I go, so say I'm at the hospital and I go into a room and a young Black mother sees me come into the room as her lactation consultant, their face lights up like, oh, thank God, like thank God,
yeah.
you see me.
Representation matters.
And it really does matter, and that just is so special, and it means so much to me, and it's just so needed, so necessary, and you have to think about, most people probably don't, but you have to think about how breastfeeding is tied to maternal mortality and infant mortality because like really it's life-saving. And really in the long run, it helps our outcomes for our overall health, even heart disease, even, cancer, diabetes, all those things that we can lower our risk of if we start having higher rates of breastfeeding. And so it's really important, and it's more important than one would think, and most people wouldn't really think that it's tied to maternal mortality, but I think overall and over time that it would contribute to lowering the rates of a lot of the things we're seeing because we're gonna have better health, better overall health, and breastfeeding, it is a public health issue.
No, you're definitely right on that. And I just want to speak to the inclusive space. You know, these are Indigenous, Black, and Brown women issues, big issues. We see the statistics, we see the numbers,
Mhm.
So in this inclusive space, I just want to make sure that people know where I stand. That for me, I've never used BIPOC before. I've always used persons of color. I
Mhm.
know that's what they fought for in the civil rights. But in BIPOC spaces, it is not anti-white spaces. It's just counter spaces. I want to
Mhm.
put that out there. And
Mhm.
that when we see one of our own, representation does matter because it doesn't charge us. It doesn't have us on that hyper vigilant. And there's not a lot of explaining that we have to do because we know each other culturally, relationally, and in community. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if representation wasn't there for me, and usually it isn't, I do want to sit across a birth worker that knows their stuff,
Mhm.
and that she's out there, to take care of me so I can give the best nutrition possible to my child. And if I'm having issues, that this birth worker is up on her studies, is up on her game, and that, she is being attuned to me. But like I said, if that's not available to me, because usually it isn't.
Mhm.
When I had someone sit across from me, it wasn't someone that looked like me, but I appreciated her
Oh,
because she took the
absolutely.
time out. But still, we have to put into this space that Black and Brown people, especially, let's keep this real, especially Black women, we already come in the space with trauma from the cellular structure.
Yeah.
That means from in the womb.
Mhm.
And as a trauma specialist, I have to put it out there. Trauma changes the brain. So if we're talking about from the cellular structure in the womb and we're talking about pregnant women, birthing persons, and we all start out as the what? The neural tube. That means that the brain is changing in the baby and it's also changing in the mom if she doesn't feel safe, if she doesn't feel heard, and she doesn't feel seen. And when
Mhm.
someone is in that high end activated state, no healing could occur, right? We're talking about the cortisol. We're talking
Mhm.
about all these things. So I just want to make that clear in the space when we're having the conversation because we are connecting
Yeah.
relationally. We do have a language with our eyes that we don't have to explain with our head nods. You know what I mean? With the little chuckles that we have that we don't have to explain to anyone. But as we release this in the inclusive space, that yes, representation does matter, and
Mhm.
also being up on your education, and that those that do want to be an IBCLC, that the easiest way to do it is to go through a straightforward path.
Mhm.
And it sounds that you have created just that, Leslie.
That was ultimately the goal, and within my program, it's really become kind of like a melting pot, and so and there's people all over the world in the program, and it's kind of it's taken off a little bit quicker than I thought that it would, and so I've had to catch up to the infrastructure being able to support the growth because it is there is a demand, and we just didn't even know there was such a demand for this, and it is needed, and people are looking for it. But we have people all over the world. I have Canadian students. I have a student in South Africa. I have a student in Pakistan, and I've had people inquire, all over the world, and this is just the beginning because the program has only been around for a little over a year.
Well, you're in the perfect space because the birth worker community is a global space that has been growing since 2019. We just last week had 1,100 new members come into the space.
Wow.
So you are in the perfect space and the perfect time, and I'm just very glad that we connected and that you're bringing this into the space and that we have more conversations like this. You
Yeah, I
know,
mean, I'm really glad. It's been a pleasure. And yes, all everything that we talked about is they're important conversations to have. And I always want to be inclusive and also honor, the those that need to be seen and need to be heard. There are sometimes they're not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for anybody new that might be listening in before we wrap this up, can you explain to them a little bit about your experience about being in the birth worker community?
Mhm.
How long you've been there and how do you feel about the space and what would you like to see, that we might not be doing already?
I think the space is awesome because, well, I've been there for probably like a year, I believe. And I've just started to, I'm even in real life, I'm the kind of person who does a lot of observing more than I do talking. So I may not be the person posting every day, but I read a lot and I observe a lot. And even in a real life, I'm like that. On a one-on-one, like we're having a conversation, I can talk, 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 talk. But in a large setting, I like to observe a lot before I really insert myself. And so the space I think is it's very appealing because it does seem like just kind of a little bit of a melting pot, like you said, like being global and having people from everywhere all over the world is really cool. And also people from all different types of backgrounds in the birth worker space. And as far as being different types of perinatal professionals, there's midwives and there's lactation and there's doulas and I'm sure all other types of perinatal professionals in there. I think that's really cool. I think it's a great opportunity to network with amongst each other and to learn from each other